Player freedom. It's a principle of game design that makes up a core pillar of a lot of the games that we play these days, and as gaming has continued to get more and more advanced, it's a pillar that is often called upon from gamers to be included as well. Players, they want choice. They want the ability to dictate how they approach a game's challenge, its story, its gameplay, and they want the ability to dictate that on their own terms as well. In the context of gaming more broadly, it's why we see so many more open world games these days rather than linear-based level games. You know, the Minecrafts, the Horizons, the Grand Theft Autos, the Fallouts, the Cyberpunks of the world. While they do follow a set story in some cases, they also let the player choose the route in which the story is told and experienced, and at what pace it does so as well. In the context of first-person shooter games, it's why we are seeing more and more customization and more ways to personalize and optimize loadouts, and even more ways to express ourselves through cosmetics, even if at times we don't get to see those cosmetics ourselves, only our peers and our opponents do. Player freedom in the first-person shooter context is also more often than not viewed as a critical component to game longevity these days. To certain extents, I would agree with that. While a presence of player freedom in a competitive game can also breed, meta-slaving and broken kits that completely break the balance of the game in ways that devs didn't foresee, it also gives players countless ways to approach the game and try new things. A means to keep the gameplay loop going well beyond what would be possible in a heavily linear game. The pros definitely outweigh the cons a lot of the time, especially when you're also working with a dev team that are on the ball in making fast and accurate balance updates to said power creeps. Scenarios where developers are willing to create limitations in the gameplay environment so that mechanically, a player base can't optimize the fun out of the game in the name of winning said game. Which brings us to our case study for today, Planetside 2, a game which prides itself on being an open world, persistent MMO first-person shooter game that truly tries to simulate a large-scale war. 3 factions vying for control over a giant map with no end in sight over the conflict. It's a game that genuinely plops you on the map, gives you a bunch of tools to approach the fight however you want to do so, gives you the good old pat on the back and says, "Go get 'em, sport." It really represents the ultimate form of a first-person shooter sandbox, and it kinda lets you do whatever you want. Sounds great in theory, right? Well, that's until you realize that this is actually one of the reasons Planetside ends up being so frustrating to play. And before you go racing down to the comments to absolutely flame me, I challenge you to hear me out for this one. You see, folks, I've been doing a lot of thinking about Planetside 2 as of late. While I don't play the game as much anymore, it still is one of my favorite games of all time for all of the memories that I have with it. And in all honesty, it's one of the greatest missed opportunities of first-person shooter gaming in my opinion as well. I still remember getting into Planetside 2 when it first released. I was a budding new player to the PC gaming market and had mainly gotten a PC to enjoy the peak of what Battlefield 3 had to offer. So when I heard about Planetside 2, which is a game that basically prided itself on being a Battlefield on roids, it had me hooked, and being a part of the massive war machine in my own way that was my faction was enough to keep me coming back. One day I could be a combat medic supporting my squad, the next I could be rocking as a tank crew for a whole session, or God forbid, I would be a simple yet dreaded heavy assault just doming people left and right. That freedom was the sandbox of Planetside, and in and around the launch period of this game, when everyone was still learning the game and just enjoying it for what it was, that experience was truly magical. But, and this is a big but here, when Planetside's sandbox breaks is when you also remember that gamers are inherently competitive in nature and will optimize the route to victory wherever possible, even if it means completely obliterating the flow of the game to achieve it. Now, this is obviously something that happens in every competitive first-person shooter game. If you have a player that has discovered or achieved the means of play that dominates the competition at every turn, it feels like a GG automatically. The helicopter crew that can move like a ballet ensemble in Battlefield feel like they're always dominating. An AWPer in Counter-Strike that can't be touched might feel like it's the hand of God smiting you every round. The Movement King in COD is going to feel as slippery as the Ocean's 11 crew, with no way of locking them down. But I digress. In Planetside, the problem is further exacerbated by one thing and one thing only. There are no rules. There are no limits. In every other first-person shooter game, there are limits to the amount of stuff that is considered powerful that can be present on the game at once. In Battlefield, there are only a select amount of vehicles allowed per team, with costly respawn timers upon death. In Counter-Strike, high-value weapons are limited by dollar values, and missteps lead to costly downtimes before you can equip them again. Hell, even in more hardcore games like Squad, there are hard, team-wide and squad-wide limits on how many auxiliary and force multiplier roles, such as AT, machine gunners, snipers, and grenadiers, that you can have at a time. These rules, quite simply, are what keeps elements of force multiplication in check. It's what makes the effort of taking these things out in a game feel rewarding, but also what makes using these things and doing well with them feel even more rewarding. But most importantly, it's also what ensures the game's core flow can continue to operate as intended. It ensures that one side cannot rely on an overwhelming use of one asset to assert victory. By providing a limit on these items, force multipliers or assets, whatever you want to call them, it ensures that every role in a game, from the humble rifleman to the geeked out of his mind jet pilot, has a role on the field to feel impactful. To ensure that if you don't get your hands on that crazy thing for a round or a game, that's okay. You can still be a part of the action and have agency in the game. Using the example we put forward earlier, and in order to illustrate my point a bit here, in Battlefield, say there is a helicopter pilot and gunner duo in the lobby that holds the skills to just completely decimate the opponents, but the one helicopter that is available to their team is already in use by another set of players, right? It's being used, they can't actually get into the helicopter at the moment. Imagine there was a capacity for this Giga Sweat team to simply spawn another one at will. The power that that one crew holds quickly exacerbates from being, difficult to counter to an unkillable force that will dominate the lobby simply because they have two of the one asset that's meant to be limited by, one. The removal of the limit takes the problem from challenging to impossible. This is the problem with Planetside. Planetside holds no rules that limit player choice. This exact outcome can and does occur often, and as a result, it can very quickly see certain roles and playstyles in the game get completely invalidated. With the game priding itself on giving you the ability to practically run any kind of kit or vehicle whenever you wish to do so, with no limits or considerations taken to the amount of them on your faction already in use, you can very quickly go from having a nice and fair afternoon skirmish at a fight, only for 6 tanks to show up and completely destroy your sunder a spawn point, or lock you down into the base's spawn room depending on what side you're on. This one simple action that Planetside's freedom allows completely invalidates all of the agency you have in that engagement. And while yes, you could pull a tank yourself to try and counter it, there's a high chance that if you're playing solo or even with a couple of buddies, you're going to get completely melted too. So once again, you still have lost that sense of agency that you carry in the game, and the only real option for you now to keep having fun is to simply rage quit and go to a new fight. And I know this is going to get brought up in the comments, so I figured I'd quickly address it now. Yes, in Planetside there are respawn timers for these force multipliers, and they do cost a resource to pull, of which can limit players if they're silly with them, but I think we can also agree that the use of resource boosters and certain cost reduction effects that can be applied from multiple sources, as well as just not playing like a nincompoop, completely circumvents the timer that Planetside puts in the game, and that really does afford you to sit in force multipliers as long as you want and or wish to do so. But I digress. That leaves us with the first problem with Planetside's sense of freedom. The availability of tools that act as force multipliers is determined by the players, not by the developers. And in doing that, there's no neutral party acting as a mediator to ensure that fights are objectively fair and, dare I say, fun for all sides of the party. Or maybe more accurately, have the capacity to be fun. But this is only exacerbated when you add in another element of Planetside's sandbox that can be completely controlled by its player base, one that is also completely unique to this game, that being the scale in which a fight takes place at. The numbers of participants who are actively in it, but more importantly, how those participants are split between the sides of the fight. Obviously, it's an issue when you afford the player base the means to completely control the kinds of tools that are used for a fight with no limitations. But when you take that one step further and also let them control how many people are in a fight with no limitations, it gets worse. To illustrate my point once again, let's return to that example we drew up earlier with the helicopters in Battlefield. This is already a pretty grim picture, yeah? Now just imagine that the enemy had double the amount of players available to them versus yourself. Like you had 48 players on your team in the fight versus their 96. Doesn't sound fun, right? Once again, this is exactly what happens in Planetside. Planetside's gameplay loop tends to operate in one of two ways through the freedom afforded to players when it comes to scale and force allocation. It either acts in an escalatory manner, wherein which groups of players will see a fight on the map, move over there to support their faction, and this just keeps ballooning and snowballing until a larger squad on the server decides to shift the balance with an overwhelming force, and then it just keeps going vice versa. Or in a brute force manner, where in order to avoid the possibility of an overwhelming force meeting or beating you, you just show up with an overabundance of power straight out of the gate, i.e. a zerg of players, to completely dissuade anyone from challenging you in the first place, and scoring the capture on a base, and therefore the overall objective of the game, for free. Once again, there's no limits imposed by design, which affords the players the means to completely destroy the ability for a fight to even occur in the first place. Now, in all the hypotheticals that we've talked about today, do I blame the players for doing this? Of course not. The game not only allows it, but it encourages it, as it's the most efficient way to achieve the objective of capturing the territory. It's simply a whole lot easier to win a fight when your enemy can't put up a fight in the first place. But this is the core of the problem that makes Planetside's two key feature and selling point also a big problem for keeping the core gameplay loop enjoyable consistently. For every good, fair, close fight that you have in this game, you're likely to come across 5 or so complete one-sided stomps because a group of players simply wanted to shut the fight down with the intent of winning. Whether that be through the numbers you encounter or the types of force you encounter or a mixture of both. And if you were to load up any other first-person shooter game under the pretense that 4 out of the 5 matches that you had in the game were completely unfair, 80% of the games that you were going to play were either one-sided stomps that you lost in or one-sided stomps where you won but you barely got to shoot anyone because they simply didn't show up to play at all, then you wouldn't play, wouldn't you? It doesn't sound fun. And I truly believe that in the case of Planetside, that's the calculation that a lot of the game's potential, and have since moved on players, have done, subconsciously or not. Ultimately, folks, the freedom that is afforded to players in Planetside, one of the core pillars that makes up the game's identity as a whole, is also one of the things that truly makes it one of the most frustrating games to play in this day and age. The art of completing the objective in Planetside comes through completely decimating your opponents, similar to how it is in all other first-person shooter games. Only in Planetside, there's no limit in the kinds of tools, vehicles, or even numbers of players that you can employ to achieve that objective. All it takes is a group of players to leverage a side of the game in mass, and suddenly that fight that you were very much enjoying becomes a spawn-locked stomp that at times demands that you leave the fight entirely to continue enjoying the game. There's only so much of that one can take before you're just going to go find a better experience elsewhere. And unfortunately, the game encourages this behavior as it is the most efficient way to complete the overarching objective. I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you play the game as it allows you to if that's how you are most likely to win? Freedom is grand when it's applied within reason, and I do believe that the best FPS games are the ones that, yes, let players get creative and let players experiment, but still put up limitations and constraints to ensure that some degree of order remains. Planetside is a game that, should you encounter a force that completely overwhelms you, relies on the good nature of other players of your faction to come and support you. So if that support never shows up because the freedom of the game allows your faction to respond in such a way, then that fight is basically done. You have no agency yourself to counter-engage effectively, which in a way kind of strips the very sense of freedom the game is trying to give you in the first place away from you. It is, without a doubt, one of the most unique takes of player freedom in a first-person shooter game, but also one of the most redundant, and maybe even one of the most savage we've ever seen. And I truly believe that despite Planetside's best efforts, has kind of proved why a game of this type, an MMO first-person shooter, doesn't work a lot of the time. Anyway folks, if you have made it this this far through my rambling today. I really do appreciate the support, and keen to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. I've spent a bit of time thinking up this video and developing out the rationale for this argument, so do let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you think it is well-based or if it's as ropey as they come. And as always, if you enjoyed the content, be sure to backhand the like button. It does go a long way to supporting the channel. But until next time, folks, peace out, have a good one, look after yourselves and each other.